spending initiative is so resonant of fiscal drag, pandering. This is not a word that is used in any other country I know. Yojana, scheme. Yojana is a plan, but it has sort of degenerated into scheme. I like the idea that every so-called scheme now will have a sunset date, and that sunset date will trigger an outcome review. And finally, I like the idea the government has decided to do away with the plan, non-plan classification. I live in hope, I'm an optimist. Finally, I hope, the government of India will be persuaded that events like this will become a thing of the past and we will move to a modern, medium-term fiscal framework. No zamindari style targets for tax, but tax forecasts based on the tax base and what we think is going to happen to it, for which people who do that are then accountable. An allocable ceiling which specifies what expenditure is committed and is not committed, a consistent investment strategy which empowers line ministries then to decide what to do with their money, and an overall macroeconomic framework that specifies the government's growth and inflation aspirations. This brings about a medium-term rolling framework, which I think now the building blocks for are all in place. So this outdated, horrid budget execution system we now have the building blocks to move away from it. I am delighted. And finally, I read the review of the FRBM in this context. I do not think I know what the markets are going to say. They're going to say, oh, the FRBM is just an excuse to, further relax fiscal consolidation. It may well do that. And I think it's always valid from time to time, once you have delivered in your commitments, to have a review of what we are targeting, how much we should target. That will be part of the conversation, sure. But I also think that the medium-term review that the government has proposed in the budget will also be about instituting a medium-term fiscal management system. I hope, of course, and I think because I'm an optimist. So I live in hope that this will happen. And there are several other important reforms I won't go into. You can pick it up in the discussion, which I'm happy with. They've been happening for some time, rationalizing the centrally sponsored schemes, targeting some subsidies, Indian Financial Code, improving the ease of doing business. So these are the good things. There are some not bad things in this budget. There are some bad habits in this budget. And the most serious bad habit is this continued theft from the states, bipartisan theft from the states in the form of cesses. Swachh Bharat says, I don't know what says, startup says, I can't remember. But these are thefts because these are not shareable with the state governments. And that is not consistent with the spirit of intergovernmental fiscal relations. And to say, I think, Revenue Secretary said that, I'm going to criticize him for this publicly, that, oh, you see, with some of these cesses, there are indirect taxes, and therefore, when GST comes, they'll go away anyway, so we're taking temporary advantage, I think is absolutely egregious. Why should you not share the temporary benefits of that too with the states? Why should the center have the priority to spend that money until GST comes? This is wrong, and I want to say very emphatically that this should not be encouraged and say that this is terrible. This is a theft from the divisible pool. It goes against the spirit of the Constitution and it should not be repeated. Okay. And here's a list of cesses. No time to go through them, but what a mess we have made. My God, just look at this. Just look at this. I mean, what? Is this a $2.3 trillion government? So here I do continue to criticize them. Too many exemptions and debates, but they made a start, so I will not focus on that. The share of subsidies in total expenditure has not fallen, despite a fall in fuel subsidies, and this worries me. This really does worry me. We can take it up in the discussion, but please note that. In the share of subsidies in total government expenditure, where the rupee goes, that has not fallen. And of course, let me conclude. This budget, therefore, what have I spoken on? I've spoken on two things, the macro fiscal framework and the business process reforms. I think in both, this government has made remarkable strides, strides that I've not seen for many, many years. And for that, I recognize that this budget makes very grandiose claims. And that's natural. I mean, politicians have to be re-elected. They're going to seek to please political constituencies. So every budget makes grandiose claims. This one does too. And I'm as skeptical about them as many people are. So if somebody's going to tell me this budget does not provide more money to education, I have no disagreement with you. But I still support this budget because unlike other budgets which have promised in the past and failed to deliver on these counts, as this budget may well, it maintains prudence. It enhances, therefore, credibility of the government, which is very low, contrary to what many people in government seem to think. Credibility as a fiscal manager, and has initiated very important, unglamorous, media not interested structural reforms, which I think will serve the country well. For that reason, this budget has several public interest elements in it, and I commend it to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rathin, for this you stuck to the time given. And you also talked about some areas of concern, talked about the CapEx issue, which is indeed a cause for concern that is declining, the theft from the states, and also, I think equally important is the lack of subsidies reform. So I think we'll come back to these issues. May I now invite Shekhar Shah of NCAER to speak on the sectoral issues in the budget, with particular reference to the infrastructure sector. Shekhar.
Thank you, Ashok, and it's really great to be here at this 10th budget seminar. I'm the original culprit who started this when I was in the World Bank. And again, I'm grateful for all these years for the World Bank to support us. And it's great to have Ashok here. The one thing I do want to say is that the level of reporting on the budget has really improved dramatically in the years. And I think the Business Standard, of course, has taken a very good lead on that. And I absolutely loved your headline, which said that it's now up to the Governor of the Reserve Bank of India to take the lead. I'm going to speak about infrastructure, but also more about agriculture, because so many of us have thought about this as really return back to the roots type of budget. And indeed, I'll try and say a little bit about that. And, let me just start out by saying that I both love and hate this budget. I love it for all the reasons Rathin has pointed out. I think there are some very fundamental things that have happened, unglamorous, as he said, not much interest of the media in this, but clearly seminal and fundamental to improving what the budget should be doing in any country of our size. The sectors I'm going to cover: agriculture, farm and non-farm, infrastructure and industry. But I'll focus a lot on agriculture. And clearly this starts out in the very first two pillars that the FM put out amongst the 9 pillars, agriculture and farmers' welfare, and the very bold claim which Prime Minister Modi also made in 3 speeches that prefaced the budget, that he intends farm income to double by 21-22, and a big boost to the rural sector on infrastructure and employment. And you can see some of the allocations that are promising this kind of increased attention, which is not, of course, surprising given where the government is in its political cycle. Agriculture, which was largely ignored in the first 2 budgets, and I think the government perhaps paid for it, now has this dramatic increase from about 15,809 crores to about 36,000 crores, with, again, some of the famous cesses that Rathin pointed out now also finding their way in agriculture, and we will be faced with a Krishi Kalyan cess on our service tax obligations. The key farm proposals, and there are several of them, and again, this is going back. I think we are transitioning from the license Raj to the patronage Raj now to the scheme Raj. And I think we need to start thinking about where we are going in terms of not being able to bring the same kind of attention that was brought on the fiscal consolidation issue, and the FM referred to this, that he had conflicting views. And there are many in this audience and on the panel itself who are part of this side and that side views. I think mostly everybody on the panel here probably said consolidate. But I know that there are others in the audience who probably thought otherwise. That same kind of attention which says, look, this is so important, you cannot get away from this, perhaps now needs to be paid to the scheme Raj, where we need to start thinking about, this doesn't make sense. We need to be talking about principles. We need to be talking about level playing fields. We need to be talking about incentives, not this kind of, we have a scheme for everything. But you can see, as I'll go through this, that these are the allocations, with the largest, of course, being made, and I'll spend a little time on that, for the interest subsidy for short-term credit to farmers, which many, Ashok Gulati, I don't know if he's here, but many have pointed out, really was a transfer from the Ministry of Finance to the Ministry of Agriculture. But then there are the other schemes, the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, I'll say a few words about that, the Rashtriya Krishi Vikas Yojana, the Mantri Krishi Sanchai Yojana, of course the National Food Security Mission, and the National Mission on Sustainable Agriculture. So we have this tendency to design a scheme for everything. And that, I think, is also a step in the wrong direction. The FM called the crop insurance scheme path-breaking, and that was his big response, apart from the interest subvention, which has the largest allocation in the budget. This is the second largest allocation in the budget, and the government hopes to address the agrarian crisis. But when you think about it, as economists tend to, insurance markets are not the best markets to work. They fail very often in many places, with more advanced institutions than ours, more implementation capacity than ours, particularly in agriculture, where risks are highly correlated. If there is a drought, it's going to affect all the farms in a particular region. And secondly, where there's huge moral hazard, especially when you will subsidize premia, as the government will, it has to, because the probability of a drought is somewhere between 7 and 20% when you look at the historical data, which means that for an insurance of 1,00,000 rupees, the premia are going to be something like 14,000 to 20,000 rupees. Now, that is going to be a problem because clearly the government is going to subsidize that. When you subsidize premia, then there's additional risk-taking. Additional risk-taking will particularly happen in MSP crops because there is a base price there, and already distort further the crop choices that are being made under MSP. So when you think about the innards of a scheme, what looks very good really does not have the potential of really fundamentally changing the incentive structure and providing the kind of safety net that an insurance market is supposed to. Plus also the required infrastructure is not in place and probably won't be in place for a couple of years. So if there is a continuation of the El Nino effect, then we'll have a serious problem. I mentioned the interest subsidy on short-term credit. As I said, this was really a transfer from the Ministry of Finance to the Ministry of Agriculture. It is positioned at 15,000 crores, but it already was 13,000 crores in the last budget. And again, there's no clear framework to evaluate who enjoys the benefit of the scheme and therefore how it should be modified in the future. So this is one of the other problems that we face when we do scheme after scheme without worrying about who's picking up the pieces once a scheme is implemented, who's doing the learning, who's feeding back into the design of these programs. That remains a very serious problem. And again, the same kind of attention that has been paid to the fiscal architecture for the first time in many years, I hope can come to these sectoral issues. And again, it requires, I think, a kind of a compact, the kind of coming together of many economists who argued for fiscal consolidation. I think we need to bring that same kind of spirit to these sectoral issues as well, as opposed to the few lone voices who are very prominent. Irrigation, of course, does hold the ultimate key to greater productivity in agriculture. A few things have been done, and a lot has been promised. A new NABARD irrigation fund worth 20,000 crores, for which they've provided through both some provision in the budget plus borrowing, something like 12,500 crores.